I'm allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah, but not in the first sentence. All
Yes,
right.
I am allowed to make mistakes in the first sentence.
Welcome to the Simpleton podcast. I'm Laura Heeman, and I'm here with Clark Massey. I'm in Washington, D.C. He's in Kansas City. And today we are going to talk about the founding of a simple house, which is something that we're often asked about a lot. Clark is the founder. And Clark, you started thinking about starting something like this maybe late 2002?
I think that's right. You know, we started out in Washington, D.C., and my situation was probably since I left grad school, I really wanted to be a missionary, and I really wanted to do some ministry work with the poor. I wanted to be real friends with the poor. And I kept running. When you're Catholic and you want to be a missionary, you kind of run into this problem of like, do you join a religious order? Do you become a priest? Like, what is a Catholic missionary? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't quite find an order or a group that fit well.
Right.
You know?
And you weren't like just 21, 22-year-old fresh out of college. You'd had a job and stuff. And
I mean, I was like 24.
Okay.
I mean, I was like 24 to 26 in that time frame, you know, like visiting religious orders. And I kind of had this problem that like, it was a weird moment in the church. Like, there was this kind of like orthodoxy in the church and unorthodoxy in the church. Like there were these orders that were just kind of like doing their own thing, like not really believing in the church's teaching. And it's like, why would you give your life to this, you know? Yeah. And then there were these other orders that were more or less orthodox, but some of them were crazy too. I mean, I remember going to one order and they were giving their novices a class I sat in on where they claimed the Antichrist had come to earth during the French Revolution, you know? Okay. And it's just kind of like, well, maybe, but like, I don't know. This is my novice formation, you know? The other thing I remember well is I went to visit the CFRs for like 3 days, and it was very powerful, and I was really miserable. And it was very powerful because I saw them doing what I kind of wanted to do. Like they were very much with the poor. They were taking the Bible and St. Francis very literally, say. And I was just like miserable the whole time I was there, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And Father Bernard, who I think became head of the order, but he was novice master at the time, talked to me, and he was just like, I think you have a vocation, but I don't think it's here. Yeah. And I'm very glad that all happened. Yeah. I have a sense that maybe it was because they didn't let me have coffee while I was there, and I was such a big addict that could have been why I was miserable the whole time. But I remember a whole lot from that visit. Like that was just a powerful 3 days, you know? But I kind of got myself in a situation where I wanted to be a missionary, but I didn't have an order I wanted to join. Yeah. And I was living at the Catholic Worker, and it all kind of came to a head where I wrote a really long letter to my spiritual director, Father Adam at Conception Abbey. And the letter had like 3 options. I'm like, because Father Adam's really big. He gives this talk, like, or you and I've talked that, we need to somehow get Father Adam's talks and then do dramatic interpretations of him so that when he when he goes into heaven, we'll be able to do Father Adam talks for people. Right. Well, one of his famous talks is "Don't be a loser," and he has these like categories that you have to do in order not to be a loser. And one of them is kind of like to commit yourself and to like kind of go for it, you know? Yeah. That's not what the category is called. I know Father I'd be mad that I'm not using his category names. It's like have life insurance, have a library card, and have a mailing address. Right, or 3 categories. Right, yeah. Those are the Don't be a loser. So I needed something to not be a loser, you know? And my 3 ideas were, I love the Desert Fathers. What if I try to go be a Desert Father out in Arizona because I loved Arizona? And that was a weird idea in every way. And then the other idea was, how about I go join a religious order that seems to do what I want it to do, even if I just don't like the religious order, which is a terrible position to be in. You know, it's like for the religious order, too. You don't want people joining who don't actually like your religious order, you know? Yeah. And then the third thing was, what if I do something called Simple House? I had the name, and it was a hybrid of the Exodus and Catholic Worker Ministries that we discussed. And I wrote this up in a letter and I mailed it to him. And then I went out to Missouri to meet him. And the reason why I started mailing Father Adam letters was we had a problem that I would go to like spiritual direction and he'd be so excited to see me that he'd talk the whole time and I couldn't get any words in.
Yeah.
So I started writing him letters to make sure I got all my words in before I arrived.
Yeah.
And then he could just like go off, you know?
Right.
So I went into his office and he went off and I couldn't tell. He was so happy to see me and he knew what I should do. And he wouldn't tell me what I should do. He was just like, you know, and then finally he goes, yeah, you should go for Simple House. And he basically said, go for it like it's permanent. This is advice I give to people today even. Do something like you're going to do it for the next 5 years. Don't just put your toe in. You know, don't do it like you're going to do it for 3 months. Do it like you're going to do it for 5 years. And it may completely fail.
Yeah.
And if it fails, it will be fine. And you won't be in any worse position than you're in right now. And it'll be great, you know, even if it fails. Yeah. And that was like very freeing.
Yeah.
You know, and that was kind of like that meeting. I probably went and filed the nonprofit paperwork for Simple House a week after that meeting.
Yeah. That's great. I remember one of the things I think maybe was frustrating you or you couldn't find, like, I remember, I mean, we still talk about this a little bit, like where can a lay person like take the Bible seriously, you know, and like where can a lay person like read the story of the rich young man and say, okay, I'm gonna do this, you know, and not with kind of half measures or sort of symbolically or something, but and that was something that you kind of wanted. And then also you saw the value of, you know, like monastic life, right? And you wanted that experience.
Yeah. And I remember you and I were like walking in circles around the shrine.
So many circles.
Like what we do is we would like discern, like Laura was my sounding board for my discernment during this period. And so we would like go on these walks after like adoration or something and just circle, hashing out these ideas. Right. Yeah. And then that was huge amount of support for me during that period. And then you became the first chairman of the board when I filed that paperwork, you know, articles of incorporation and things.
I remember also talking in those conversations. It was like we were trying to figure out like who is the poorest of the poor, you know, in Washington, D.C. That was kind of an idea. Like, we were trying to figure out. But yeah, we lots of time.
And Washington, D.C. was everything's so racial and like political right now that I hate using this word, but it was like super segregated, like in a way that I have not seen. And it wasn't segregated formally, obviously, but it was just like there was just a line in town that white people did not live across that line. And particularly the Anacostia River. And I think today the property values have gone up so much that everybody grabs any property they can, no matter what neighborhood it's in, you know, and that this is kind of integrating or displacing people, whatever you want to call it. But back then there wasn't, you know, people doing that, you know? Yeah. And it was very much another country in a way. Yeah. Or it was a fully different place, even though it was 2 miles away.
Yeah. So the southeast, like east of the river, almost totally like African-American population. There's like some pockets of nicer neighborhoods, but mostly poor neighborhoods, lots of projects and stuff too. And, you know, I grew up in this area, so I didn't really, like as an adult, when I went to other cities and kind of realized there wasn't like racial tension that was kind of palpable, I was like, oh, really? Because that was very much in DC.
Yeah, like in Kansas City, the poor part of town has poor blacks, poor whites, and poor Hispanics, and even Asians, you know, living together. You know, it's not like they're getting along fabulously or anything, but it's not just this, like, you just went into, you know, like, I remember during that time, I looked at the census data when kind of looking at Simple House and where we're going to do ministry and stuff. And I remember looking at the racial part of the census data, and it said that this zip code was 99% African American. Yeah. So 1% was Asian, Hispanic, white, and probably people who refused to answer the question. Yeah. So it was a very different kind of feel. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't like when I say it went bad, I mean, I think segregation's not great, but what I mean by that is like, it wasn't like the area sucked. I mean, it was like cool. I mean, it was, we even had people who moved out of Southeast into better neighborhoods who every day their kids would get on the train and go right back to Southeast because it's where they wanted to be, you know?
Yeah, or people that moved into a nice part of town and moved back because they kind of missed Southeast.
Yeah, there were nice neighborhoods too, like the Good Hope neighborhood. And it just had a lot of character and was just a neat place to be, you know?
Yeah. People were nicer. Seriously.
They also were more native DC. Like the DC natives seemed to be like some Georgetown people and the Southeast DC people. And then the middle of the city seemed to be like people who were here who'd spent a decade or two, but it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of native DCers in between.
Yeah, you kind of had to find them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was kind of the situation we were kind of getting the ministry born into. But it was like, I remember that the place I worked, we had a black office manager, and he was a really cool guy. And he like sat me down and was really worried about me when he knew what I was going to do. Yeah. That I was going to move to Southeast. And he was just like, I'm not sure you're going to make it, man. And I didn't know if I was going to make it either. I was like, you know?
Yeah.
Because everyone was so scared of it. And he was warning me. And in the end, that warning was not necessary because, like, it's just fear mostly.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I should tell the story of the first night at the house, but because that's when the fear got to the worst.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about what the house was like?
Right. We basically got the cheapest house in Washington, D.C. I think it was less than 50 grand. Yeah. It had no furnace, no HVAC, no plumbing. Everything had burst and had been abandoned. Mm-hmm. It was like an 1880s house, I think had been built for railroad workers back in the 1880s or something. Yeah. It was probably a complete fire hazard death trap house because it was all wood that was bone dry, you know. There wasn't firewalls separating you from all the other townhouses that were also 1880s wood houses. We found it, and very lucky to find a house we could afford at all, you know, in any condition. Yeah. And the first 3-4 months of the ministry was just fixing up the house.
A donor bought the house.
Yeah, a donor bought the house. Yep. At that point, we were very committed to not owning property as a ministry. Yeah. Actually, so a thing I remember, you know, you wanted to take back to the rich young man story. You wanted to take that seriously. And I remember you sold all your stuff, like literally sold all your stuff. And you put all your money into the ministry, right? The idea was to put all the money in the ministry and even make the ministry poor, like to say that we couldn't even save money as a ministry. We thought we would never have more than however much money you had, you needed to spend a third of it that month.
So like every 3 months we were totally using up. Yeah. Right.
And sometimes we only had a week's worth of money.
Sometimes we had less.
Sometimes we had a day's worth of money. We're jumping ahead in the story, but like in about 2007 or something, I don't remember the year, you might remember it, but we got a $30,000 check in the mail.
Around Christmas?
Yes.
Yeah. At that point, have we changed to a $200 a month stipend?
No.
That was like, no. So we were like living off like $100 a month. And
every meal was canned goods, essentially.
Yeah. And you were going to announce that we couldn't take stipends and we had to kind of close down the ministry for a second because we didn't have money for gas, right?
Okay. This is a true story you're telling, and it's a different story than the $30,000 story.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, that happened, and then we got like a $10,000 check, or like literally we were sitting down to. That was in 2009, I think. We were sitting down to meet because there was a big group of us, so I knew the community was pretty big. That's why I think it was in 2009. We were sitting down to meet about cutting back on everything, and then we checked the mail, and the mail was full of an amazing amount of money.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, this meeting doesn't need to happen. And that was just awesome.
Yeah.
So, no, this was a deal. There were a couple of donors in the early years that made a huge difference to us. One was a guy out of Houston. And I remember he used to send us $500 a month, which was like amazing.
Yeah.
For us, huge boon. One time I accidentally threw away that check for some reason. I don't know why I threw it away, but I had to go through all the trash out back finding the donation, you know. But then, so one time after Christmas, we're doing fine financially, I think, because usually Christmas, people are very generous with us. And right before the year end, I'm cleaning the house and I pick up this piece of mail and I open it and it's $30,000. And that, just to give context, is like 5 or 6 times the biggest donation we've ever received.
Yeah.
You know, and I kind of didn't believe my eyes, or tried not to let myself like immediately lose it, you know? So then I just put the thing down and I kept cleaning the house. Right. Yeah. And I kept wondering, like, what do I do with this? Is this real? And how do I think? And the person who sent it, I'd never heard of. Mm-hmm. Right. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I kind of cleaned the house and I kind of didn't do anything for 2 days about it. And then I got this call from somebody I didn't know, said, did you get that check? Because we haven't heard anything from you. And it was this man and his wife from Dallas, Texas. Yeah. And they both were accountants, and he had just been going through the accounting data on the GuideStar website and found our IRS filings and just thought, I'll give to that ministry because basically they hardly have any money and it all goes to the poor. So he just sent us $30,000 out of the blue after just seeing our website and our, IRS filings, right? And then I went to meet him because I'm from Dallas. So I went to visit my parents and went to meet him, and they were just great people. And he just passed away. Oh. Yeah, and we only know he passed away because people started sending us donations in his memory. Wow. I know. His name was Chip Nichols. Yeah. And he and his wife, I think, were members of St. Rita Parish in Dallas. And they also, my memory is they taught pre-Cana classes for people getting ready to get married. And it was very neat because they were older than me, but they would flirt with each other like all the time. And they said, this is part of our witness, is that we are old and married and flirt all the time. They were just great people. So, all right, back onto it. The house. We got the house the very last day of 2003. And there were a couple issues happening that I probably would have handled differently now that I understand real estate better than I do now. But one issue was the bank wanted to sell the house the last day of 2003. The donor wanted to make sure the house was insured, and the insurance company would not insure a house that someone didn't live in. So we didn't tell the insurance company it doesn't have HVAC or plumbing or anything, but we needed to be honest and tell them it was being lived in. So on New Year's Eve, when we got the house New Year's Eve, I had to go live there, at least sleep there, I thought, just for the sake of the insurance. Yeah. Right? So that means it's January, bitter cold, and I'm in a sleeping bag on a hardwood floor, Yeah. And brought some water so I'd have something to drink,
Didn't you put Christmas lights on the door?
Yes, I was terrified, right? Because of everything I'd heard. So I put these nails on the hardwood on the door, and then I would wrap these Christmas lights around the nails so it looked like a cross, like a big glowing cross, and plugged it in. And all of this is kind of ridiculous in hindsight, that I was this afraid. I guess it was ridiculous. I'll keep going on with the story.
I think if you remember what it was like in DC at that time, people would say don't go there,
Yes. I think we were all being ridiculous, though, is the point.
Oh yeah, sure. No, but your fear wasn't out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah. I remember, so I laid down that night and was going to sleep and was very excited, very happy, very scared, and all of a sudden all this gunfire starts. And it just it wasn't like a random shot. It just kept going and going and going. It was like a half hour of gunfire. And I just thought, wow, this may have been the biggest mistake of my life, Yeah. And but I wasn't going to give up on it. It wasn't like they were shooting at my house. It was just lots of gunfire outside.
Yeah.
Like there was a
Happy
battle
New
going
Year.
on. Yeah. But what it really was Happy New Year. Everybody in Southeast would fire their guns up in the air on New Year's. Mm-hmm. And so then the next night it wasn't a problem. But that was a very scary night.
Yeah.
And later I'd meet people and they'd be like, because there were so few white people in Southeast, people knew me like I was kind of famous, because it'd be like, you'd be at the grocery store, oh, you're the dude who lives on Minnesota Avenue, the guy with that Christmas tree lights on the front of his door and the cross. You know, like I just could recognize me because I stood out so much, you know.
Right.
But anyway, so I guess the cross was good. I want people to understand why I thought I was there. You know. And I think that is important when you do ministry and missionary work. There's a distinction in how people treat do-gooders versus Christians, both in Kansas City and Missouri, that if you go to help the poor and you're a do-gooder, you're treated differently than if you're a Christian.
Why did you think it was important to live in Southeast?
Because I didn't want to be like a weekend warrior. I didn't want to be I wanted to be really with people, and I wanted to have solidarity, and I wanted to really be their friend. And I don't think it was done for any dramatic reason. It was just done that, are we really going to be, you know, equal friends and neighbors, you know? Yeah. And right now, like, as I recount this, it all sounds so stupid, because it's like, yes, these are people, duh. These little kids walk. I remember thinking this to myself even at the time, that little kids every day are walking to the elementary school at the end of my street. They're not all dying from gunfire. You know, like people just aren't getting randomly shot all the time. Yes, there is a very high murder rate. There's all these things, but it's not random, basically, right? So anyway, so there was a lot of fear, but I think most of it was irrational, I guess. You know? The one time this happened years later, but I remember being at that house and there was gunfire outside in the middle of the day. And I was kind of like, whoa, because it was, you know, if you're sitting at your dining room table and you hear two shots and you pause and you hear nothing more, well, then you just kind of go on with your day, right? But there was like two shots and then two more and then a couple more and then a couple more. And so finally I just went down in the basement, you know? Because the house didn't have thick walls or anything. And I'm sitting down in the basement, and then somebody starts knocking on my front door while the gunfire's going on. And I still had that Christmas tree light cross out. And I walk up to the front door, and there's a woman there who was a woman who prostitutes herself, right? And she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and I'm like acting like there's no gunfire. Oh, how are you doing? What would you like? Or what do you need? And she just looked at me like, and she couldn't say, like, I mean, obviously she needed to come inside because there's gunfire outside. But at the same time, the gunfire had just ceased. And we just kind of stared at each other, very awkward social interaction, and she never came inside. And I've always felt bad about that moment.
Right, you should have opened the door. And
I guess I wasn't like, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Act like this is normal, that there's like a gunfight happening outside, you know? But I should have acted like, no, this is an emergency. Grab you, get inside. I also didn't know if she was running from someone or if the gunfire was at her or whatever, you know? So I'm glad I answered the door. I'm ashamed that I didn't know how to respond once I answered the door. You know?
All right, so you moved into that house. It was a mess. It needed major renovation.
And we had a lot of help from Lawrence Kerwin, Michael Kerwin's brother. And there was a guy named Chuck who was there with me for the first 3, 4, maybe 5 months even. And Chuck and I did not have a good time. We'd not get along very well, and Chuck left. And it was very painful. That was a moment where Simple House could have failed when Chuck left. But it was good because we needed to reset the community, or if you even want to call it a community at that point. Things. We had a very different vision for what was the spiritual life and what was happening. But I also want to say that, like, something that was interesting about this was there's kind of a bad Catholic attitude that I was fighting, kind of in myself, but more in others, is that who let you do this was kind of the idea, right? Like, Catholics are a little bit too much like the reason why Simple House can start is because of the universal call to holiness,
Yeah.
You know, like we're all told to go feed the poor. We're all told to go help people. We're all told to do this. It's not like you've been told 1,000 times, why do you need permission? Why do you need a charter? Right.
Right.
And I remember I got asked by someone, like, what is the authority for you to start this? And
I think people were like worried, like, are you counselors? Are you social workers? That was a thing? No?
I don't know if that was a thing. I think.
Oh, you mean like the church? Like, where did you get?
Right.
Right. Who gave you permission in the church?
Yeah, it wasn't a secular world issue. It was like a church world issue. Like
that was a question I remember being asked a lot, though, early on. Like, well, are you social workers? You know, and we would have to explain that, hash that out.
Oh, right.
Like that we didn't have to be social workers to help the poor.
Right. And I think, though, that there's this idea that like there is this thing in the church where you're like a private or a public person. Mm-hmm. So different like organizations in the church have special statuses, like the Jesuits, right? Like a bishop can like maybe ask certain things of the Jesuits and he can't ask certain things of the Jesuits because they have some rights, right? As an organization, they have some rights. Yeah. And that's what it means to be a public person. But to get those rights, you have to follow certain rules, you know? Right. And Simple House, I am so happy, has never been a public person. Yeah. Like we are just some active parishioners who have a nonprofit, you know? And I think, you know, we're trying to be obedient to pastors and to bishops and things like this, but we don't have any status other than that, you know? Right. It's just like concerned citizens or Catholics who do things, right? But like I remember being asked what our authority was to do this and being troubled by that. And so I had met the like director of evangelization for Washington Archdiocese of Washington. And so I invited him over and he said, okay, Clark, yeah, no, I like what you're doing here. And I go, well, you know, I want to ask you, do I need like something from the bishop saying I can do this? Like, do I need an official relationship with the diocese? He just really paused and wasn't even sure himself, you know, which in hindsight, I think it's crazy I would need it. But he ended up going back to the diocese and coming back like a week later. And he goes, hey, Clark, you know me? And I'm like, yeah. And his name was Bill. I go, yeah, I know you, Bill. And he goes, all right, that's your relationship with the diocese. Yeah. So that was great. Yeah. So kind of feeling the authority of it, like having my spiritual director's permission and like, you know, kind of stamp of approval to go for something that was on my heart was important. And then also just kind of seeing through this kind of weird Catholic obstacle that we put in front of ourselves, that we have to be sent in some way to do the things we're being sent to do all the time, you know? Yeah. Like the works of mercy. Right.
I don't know. I kind of want to talk about the house more. I mean, it was a tiny place. You already said it was the cheapest house. You know, it had like a tree growing into the side of it. It was like a very dark house, and part of your sort of monastic experience, there was like no soft furniture in the house. You had like all these like wooden stools and hardwood and
I remember one time we had visitation, high school had sent over some girls with one of their teachers, and they were like making lasagnas for people. Yeah. And they were like in the dining room of Simple House and working at the table. And the lady was like, it's just so cold in here. She was trying to hint at me that I need to do something to raise temperature. She's being very polite. This woman was like polite to the max. And then she looked up and there's just this like naked light bulb hanging from the ceiling, because it kind of feels like a interrogation room in here, you know? That was the experience we were giving high schoolers at that time.
Yeah, you know, I love that. So like Visitation High School is like a really nice Catholic girls' high school in DC. It's in Georgetown. It's a really nice place, and I just think this is, you know, that house was like just major hazard, you know, and they sent girls there every year.
Yeah, and shout out to Sister Kateri of the CFRs, who was their campus minister or outreach coordinator at the time, who both hooked us up with the Visitation High School food drive, which was insane.
Right, that was, yeah.
They had this competition there where the different sides of the school would try to outdo each other on the food drive, which was funny because they'd get like a point per can. So some of the parents would game it and buy like itty
They
bitty
go to like
cans of
Costco.
tomato sauce.
Oh yeah, they would buy
And get like 1,000 of them because they reach for the point. I mean, they were very competitive, but it ended up in these unbelievable, food drive hauls,
Yeah.
Anyway, so the first outreach we did was kind of modeled after an Exodus outreach. Actually, I met Monsignor Pope. So Monsignor Pope was, I got introduced to him by an old pastor at St. Augustine's. He was just my father, and he told me I should go talk to Monsignor Pope. I went down to St. Thomas More, where Monsignor Pope was pastor, which was something that I think most Catholics have never seen. It was this unbelievable gospel mass. African Americans were the majority of the audience. Monsignor Pope's not African American, but he was leading it. And he's also interesting because he really likes the Latin Mass, but he also really likes the gospel
preach
Mass.
the roof off a place. Yeah. And he loves the
they
gospel
also say
Mass.
that when he does the Latin Mass, he preaches like he's at an African American church where he's like, can I get an amen?
Yeah.
So he was there, and I had him drive me around in his car to help me understand where I should start, doing ministry. I didn't want to do it to my direct neighbors because of some experiences we had at the Catholic Worker, where your neighbors don't necessarily want that. You need to be a good neighbor, not be like ministering to your neighbors.
Right.
So we went right next to St. Thomas More on Southern Avenue, and he was very famous in the neighborhood for being.
He would walk around the neighborhood. Yeah.
Right. And to see a white priest walking around the neighborhood and walking into buildings, like people were. To kind of give another sense of, I don't want to keep saying how scary it was or whatever, but to give a sense, like people were amazed that he feared nothing. People were amazed that he would walk through like drug dealers and go into buildings. I had a friend who also was very important in our founding, Sarah, who was a teacher down in Southeast. And one time she was walking home, she'd missed her bus to go back to Northwest DC, and she was teaching at a Catholic school in Southeast. And she started walking along one of the major streets in Southeast, and a bus careened over through traffic to pick her up.
Wow.
Because seeing a white young woman walk in the neighborhood was so shocking to the bus driver. He halted everything to go pick her up,
Yeah.
So that was kind of the situation. That all makes it, I'm kind of torn between saying it was like that and saying it wasn't really actually that bad at all. It was a wonderful place in so many ways. And I don't want to, the fear was the fear was there, but it was a little bit unfounded.
Well, I guess going back to the idea that there was a sort of palpable racial tension, in DC, and it wasn't like people were not like, you're white, get out. It wasn't that. It was just like, why are you here? Why would you want to be here? Don't you know people say you're not supposed to be here? Like, it was like...
I felt like it wasn't... I feel like racial tension's maybe not the right way to describe it, because like once...
maybe an awareness, like there was... It's like if you were white and walking in Southeast, it was like a question mark. Like, why were you there?
100%.
Yeah.
But it'd be kind of like being black in China.
I guess I don't... Yeah.
Well, I just mean like, it was like... I don't think people in Southeast were threatened by white people in Southeast.
No, and they weren't like trying to chase you out or something aggressive. There wasn't like a weird thing like that.
It wasn't like you felt their hatred or something.
No,
you know what I mean? It was just weird. But then later, when people actually start getting displaced, I did feel racial tension.
Yeah.
Then you started feeling like, why are you here? I resent that you're here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've been here for 8 years already. Like, I'm not a newcomer.
Not that long. Yeah.
I'm not,
right.
But yeah, no, that was...
When people, and people were kind of coming, doing some ugly things, wanting to change it, you move down to Southeast and then you start making all these changes and demanding this and that of your neighbors. And it was like a little bit ugly. Right. And that's,
is that still the way it is right now or not? The Southeast is still changing, right?
Yeah. I mean, Anacostia is totally different, right, from when we're talking about, it's very different. Yeah.
Well, Monsignor Pope was really good at being patient with me, I think, because I think I would a lot of enthusiasm that I couldn't quite figure out how to use, But he pointed out our target neighborhood,
Yeah.
And we did our first outreach, which was you and I were organizing it basically because we were getting our Exodus friends and different people.
Yeah.
And it was an Easter outreach in 2004.
Yeah.
And it was a door-to-door outreach.
Right.
And my goal was to get everyone to Simple House and get them ready to go do the outreach as early in the morning as possible. And I think we did it Easter morning. Is that right? Maybe we did the day before Easter.
No, I think we did it on Saturday. Yeah.
Okay, we did the day before Easter.
Yeah.
And I got people.
No, because the reason we did it on Saturday was because part of our outreaches has always been an invitation to Mass.
Yes. We invited people to Easter Mass. And if you could imagine this, we built little bags of goodies for kids, you know? So they were like little, like, you know, toys that were just kind of like the toys you get as like a carnival prize.
They were like Oriental Trading Company.
Right.
That they
Stuff
were,
that
was
kids
that,
think's really cool for about 20 minutes, you know?
Yeah, and then it breaks. Yeah.
Yeah, that breaks. And then,
sorry, kids.
and then we did something really nice for the moms, you know, because the moms are always the focus with Simple House. And we kind of do something for the kids so the moms know we love the mom. So we had these like little gift bags that could be given to kids on Easter morning, and then we had like a real nice chocolate bunny for the moms, you know, an invitation to church, and I think a religious gift too. It was either, can't remember
like
what the
a
religious
holy
gift
card
was.
or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my goal was that we were going to get ready to go super early in the morning, because every time I drove by those streets, there was a lot of drug dealers out on the streets that were really bothering me in my head, like what was going to happen, you know? And so our goal was to get there early enough in the morning that they weren't out there yet and go door to door. And what I didn't realize at the time is that dealing drugs is a very dedicated profession, and you work very long hours.
Yeah.
Like you're out there 24/7.
Yeah.
So these guys were already standing in front of all the buildings and on the street and kind of doing their thing. And they're very intimidating, you know?
Yeah.
And probably should be, you know, like they're probably armed and they're, you know, standing around. And when they kind of saw what we were up to and we kind of proactively, friendly greeted them, they were just so welcoming, and they started showing us to the doors and said, don't miss this family and come meet my grandma type thing, right?
Yeah.
And it was a very beautiful day. It started with me like my stomach dropping out because I was worried to like could not be better.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we became longtime friends with some of those guys.
Yeah. I have a memory of that. So it's like we go door to door, give this invitation to church, give these gifts, and then like you'd ask people if they want to pray, was like basically has been the idea of all our outreaches. And, you know, it's like every door you're kind of trying to get a feel for how welcome you are or whatever. And there was this very shy woman, and I couldn't tell if she was bothered that I was there. So I was like, okay, well, bye, you know, here's this. And she was like, well, didn't you say you're from the church? Like, can't we pray? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, we can, you know. And then she asked us to come back, and she became one of our longtime friends. But that was a thing that was shocking to me coming from her. She was so shy. But also you'd walk into an apartment full of like, probably you could tell some illicit activity was going on, and you'd be like, oh, hi, here you go. And they'd be like, well, you're a church person. Aren't you going to pray with us? Like, yes, I am. So that
is something I think is so shocking to like kind of suburban sentiments, you know, like, like if you're like when people like, if you like went and knocked on somebody's door and asked them if you wanted to pray in a suburban neighborhood, you would have just crossed every social faux pas or whatever you want to call it.
Well, like possible. If you ever got there, because like we would like, my mom would be like, be quiet, hide, you know? Like, it's like a, but someone like coming to evangelize.
Like, in these communities, it's like awesome. Like, it's like, if you forget to offer it, they remind you. And it almost doesn't even matter what's happening. It could be a complete drug den.
Yeah, and like totally,
they will go into the back room and wake someone up who's taking a nap and pull them to the front room to get prayer. Right? Yeah. So the ministry, like from that day forward, was very blessed. Like that was kind of the breaking of ice, that Easter 2004.
Yeah.
You know, to me, that kind of sums up the founding. You know, we had a guy named Chuck ended up leaving somewhat after that. And a guy named Jim Hardcastle came.
Yeah.
He was great.
He was great. He was like kind of a shy missionary, but I remember the guys just like loved him so much.
Yes, he was a very lovable guy. He'd been the manager of a bookstore in Old Town Alexandria.
No, in DuPont.
No, Old Town.
Oh, I thought
they
was.
They had a location in DuPont. It was a chain.
Okay.
It was a DC local chain.
Okay.
Can't even remember the name of it, but he was like
Kramer's?
a manager. No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Kramer's was a famous bookstore, but I don't think that was.
It wasn't that one. Okay.
I don't think they were a chain, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, he was great. He was also a lot older than me, so that was like a little bit different because I was like 26 and he was like late 30s probably.
Yeah.
But we had a good relationship, and then in 2006 we got the other house, and you came to Simple House as a live-in missionary at the other house.
Yeah.
But I should say how we worked in those first couple of years was either my friends Glennis or Sarah would come as part-time missionaries.
Yeah.
Or Catholic University had this trailer park in the middle of campus.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. But the reason why it's so hilarious
it's gone,
is that
sadly.
I know, right? All the students talked about the trailer park like it was so cool. And yet it was like, how is this nice university got a trailer park? You know? But it was so desirable to live there that only seniors were allowed to live in the trailer park.
Yeah.
Right? And so you were living there.
Yeah.
And in order to get people to come do missionary work with me, because I didn't want to go alone, I would come up to CUA, which is a very long drive, by the way.
Yeah.
From Southeast DC. It's only 10 miles, but 10 miles could be 40 minutes in DC. You know? And I would sit down, and of course, no one would be ready, or her roommates. Shout out to Marcy and Kat. And I would sit down and wait for 30 minutes while you guys just got ready. And then I would try to take you guys down to go do missionary work for the day. Right?
Yeah.
I remember the very first day that one of the part-time missionaries went out with Jim Hardcastle, and I had nothing to do with it. And I remember it being like mind-blowing to me. It was like 2005, and it was like the first time ministry happened at Simple House where I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Shout out to Sarah for doing that with Jim. So anyway.
Oh, you know what? You also, there were some guys that lived in the trailer. They would come help you with construction, with remodeling.
Right. Yep. You recruited a bunch of people for stuff like that. And you recruited the first Christmas outreach and the donors and things.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of the way it was. Like, I feel like 2006 was kind of a turning point because we got the other house and we actually started to slowly build up a community from there. You know, before then it felt much more like, it was never truly a one-man show, but it kind of was kind of a...
Yeah, it was, it
kind of was. I mean, there were there was tons of help happening, but it was still just a crazy person with a house in Southeast. Yeah. Do you have any other memories of that period worth mentioning?
I don't think so. It was a very blessed time, though, you know, like things like came together. I mean, a lot of canned food. I don't know. I think it was for you in the early days, I don't know if you were like taking a stipend. When I came, it was like a tiny stipend. Anyway, I don't know.
I just
don't
felt
have
like
anything else.
I feel very blessed that God let us persevere during that period. Yeah. But it did feel like the reason why we were able to persevere, I think, was because we took joy in almost every single little victory we had.
I like remember like, I mean, and like, this is not my, like, thank you, Jesus, right? Like, I remember, like, it was, like, exciting to me, like, I'm gonna live off of canned food, you know? And I, like, love to eat, so now I'm like, how did I do that?
I know, like, how did we not just, like, die of sodium or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I remember there was, like, one day where it was like I had been eating so much canned food, And I don't think there was like a grocery budget at that time. And, you know, canned food is like, has a certain softness to it. And I like went to the grocery store and I bought myself like some crusty bread and iceberg lettuce and mayonnaise, and I just made myself an iceberg lettuce sandwich because I needed something crunchy. Like it was this was and this is like a good memory. But you know, I was like so desperate for something crunchy in my diet, you know, that I went and bought a head of iceberg lettuce.
So one of the kind of like rules of Simple House is to not make a rule until you have to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we say morning prayer as a community, but we started saying morning prayer as a community just so people would start work at some point.
Specifically me.
It was more than just you, but it would be like people were coming out of college not knowing they were supposed to wake up in the morning and get to work, you know? So we had to have like a start of the day, and we needed to pray, and it made sure everyone prayed together. But like one of the rules we had was we started having a grocery budget sometime after 06 when we had a couple people in the house. And then one of the funny things was this cycle developed where like the person who cared most about food was typically the one who would kind of get their way into doing the food shopping, right? And then,
I think it wasn't exactly get their way into doing the food shopping. It was like there were some people that were very happy trying to do the canned food experiment / lazy about going to the grocery store.
Sure.
So it was like,
well, let's just say that we started doing this grocery store run like once a month, basically, right?
Yeah.
And we were so desperate for food at that point that like there was like lunch meats and like Jamaican
it was like
patties.
it was like we would blow our entire grocery budget on like olives, Jamaican beef patties, and like feta cheese or something.
But then it would be like in 2 days, people would just stand with their refrigerator door open, eating what was just bought. And then after like 2 or 3 days, every Jamaican beef patty's gone. All the lunch meat's gone. Everything's gone. And it's like back to the canned goods. So we finally had to make
like
rules
back to
about
depressing.
Buying like things like rice. To make it through. So
right. Yeah.
Well, anyway, it was a good time. It was a very blessed time. And I think the Simple House missionaries today probably have similar stories, although different.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
I don't even want to share any of their stories right now that come to mind. But let's wrap this up. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Clark.
All right. I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye.